Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to our penultimate Golden Key Systems Change webinar, Creating Change Perspectives from our Evaluators. So just a little housekeeping before we begin. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box and remember to select everyone rather than hosts and panelists. If you want to ask any questions at any point, rather than using the chat box, please use the Q&A box, which you should be able to find in the menu at the bottom of your screen, or sometimes it's at the top. We'll relay questions to the panelists at the end after they've spoken. There will be slides during the webinar, and the session is being recorded. We'll share the slides and the recording with all the participants afterwards, so feel free to share the recording with your colleagues too. A quick introduction to Golden Key. We're a partnership between statutory services, commissioners, the voluntary sector, and people with lived experience across Bristol. We work together to improve services for Bristol citizens with the most complex needs. Golden Key has been funded by the National Lottery Community Fund for the past 8 years, and as the project's coming to a close in June of this year, we're keen to share our learning with the wider system. Throughout the lifetime of the programme, Golden Key has been independently evaluated. This was so lessons could be learned about how the services could be improved for the most vulnerable, not just here in Bristol, but across the whole of the UK. The University of the West of England, UE, has been our local evaluator from the beginning in 2014. So today we'll be hearing from the UE team who has been carrying out this evaluation work. We have Richard Bolden, Professor of Leadership and Management at UE, and Beth Isaac, a Research Fellow at UE. So now I'll hand over to Beth and Richard, who will share some of what they've learned from the Golden Key evaluation.
Thank you very much, Chantal. So good morning, everybody. Good to be with you this morning and to have the opportunity to share some of what we've learned through the time we've worked with Golden Key over the last 8 years. So as Chantal said, myself and colleagues are based at the University of West of England in Bristol. And we've been sort of working alongside the Golden Key team and the partnership over the last 8 years to capture really insights and learning around providing transforming services for people with complex needs, in both a sort of formative sense in terms of helping to capture learning and helping to ask questions and to inform and influence the programme as it moves forward, and also to capture evidence of impact and outcomes as we've gone along. So I'm joined today by my colleague Beth Isaac, who's been part of the team throughout, and we also have, there's a number of other colleagues as well who weren't able to join us today. So what we're going to do this morning is run through particularly focusing in on the systems change aspects of the work. As you can imagine, we've looked at quite a large number of aspects of Golden Key. It covers many areas through the time that we've worked with it. And really kind of trying to draw out some of the key lessons and insights about what seems to work and why in terms of a systems change, and using examples from the Golden Key processes. Of course, evaluating a complex and changing program like this poses its own challenges. And so through this, we've taken an approach which is largely based on a realist methodology, which says we try to look not just at what is the evidence of the impact, but kind of trying to understand what works for whom and for why. So looking at kind of the interface between sort of interventions and the outcomes within context. And linked to that is the idea of how we worked with concepts around complexity. So the idea there's probably not a straightforward linear link between interventions and outcomes. So this is sort of to bear in mind, I guess, as we talk through some of what we feed back for you today. We've had the pleasure and opportunity to work alongside many colleagues in Golden Key and the wider partnership throughout our time, particularly members of the programme team, the learning team, and also work very closely with the partnership board representing which is the representative stakeholder group, which has informed and overseen and led the initiative over the last 8 years and kind of fed into them as well. So we'll say a little bit more as we go through that. But first of all, I think I'll pass over now to Beth, who will start by giving a bit of an overview of what we actually did on the evaluation.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to just run through a bit of background about what we've done on the evaluation, particularly around systems change, and then that will help understand the context of the enablers and the findings that we're going to share with you afterwards. So firstly, if I'm just going to bear with me while I share my slides. Is that looking, can everyone see? Can I see some nods from, yeah, thanks, Richard. Okay, so just, I'm going to start with just looking at the different phases that we've had on the evaluation. So just a bit of background that we've been working on the evaluation since 2015. So we're just coming up to nearly 8 years now. We've had 5 phases through the evaluation. The first phase looking at program initiation and stakeholder engagement. The second phase looking at the client outcomes and the client experience when we actually Golden Key had recruited clients. And then we moved on to looking at the wider program systems change activity. And then in phase 4, we moved on to looking at specific change initiatives and trying to understand the change that we could find there. And in phase 5, we've moved back again to stand back and look at client outcomes and the Golden Key approach. I'm going to talk, I'm not going to talk about phases 1, 2 and 5. I'm just going to talk about phases 3 and 4. And it's also just worth saying that as we moved through the evaluation, because we were a formative evaluation, each phase was agreed, as we moved into that phase, we agreed with Golden Key what we were going to look at. And that was very much, based on the findings and the learning that we'd had already and where the program was at that stage. So just then going to drill down a little bit more into phase 3. The focus in phase 3 had moved from the client focus onto the systems change. And when we moved into that area, we were quite keen, and this would be something that is generally sort of recommended when you're trying to evaluate things in complexity. We were quite keen to do a theory of change, but we agreed in the end that actually the Golden Key systems change activity was very emergent at that stage, and there was a real challenge of setting that down in a sort of capturing that in a theory of change. So we did some work in phase 3 then to understand how stakeholders saw the purpose of Golden Key's systems change approach and the work that they were doing, and to start capturing where change might be happening, to asking people where they thought change was happening, what activities they thought were leading to change. And that also enabled us to focus on the facilitators and the barriers for systems change. And in that phase, we completed some stakeholder interviews, a desk review, and we had been sampling meetings and Golden Key events throughout the programme. And from that activity, we identified particular areas of progress and challenge within Golden Key systems change activity. And I'm not going to run through those in detail because those have kind of led into the phase 4 work and have been kind of captured within that. So in phase 4, again, we really needed to capture and test the program's systems change theory to sort of shape our evaluation. So we developed a new evaluation framework, which was specifically for Golden Key systems change activity. That was informed by the learning that we had from phase 3, and that includes a high level typology of the activities and the outcomes and impacts. And I'm going to put the framework on screen in a minute, but you won't expect you to be able to see much detail because there's quite a lot of little things going on, but I'm just going to talk through broadly how that works. But as part of the framework, we developed 9 principles, which were the kind of underpinning assumptions of that we captured from Golden Key around how they thought change, how they thought they could initiate change, and what would cause change to happen, what was important to change. So we're just going to run through those principles. So the first one was that services are person-centered and flexible and adaptive around the individual. The second was that support work is informed by psychological theories. So, for example, trauma-informed care and theories of relationship and attachment, but other psychological theories as well. The third is that services were informed by lived experience of multiple complex needs. So service user groups, lived experience groups, experts by experience. The fourth is a particular focus on interpersonal relationships, so that relationships are really important to systems change, and those relationships are really critical. The fifth is around staff support and empowerment. Staff's staff being supported to work with multiple complex needs, which are incredibly challenging, and being empowered to take action. The 6th is learning and reflection, which really underpins an experimental approach and that kind of emergent approach to systems change. 7th is a diversity, including a diversity of perspectives and experience. So lived experience might be part of that, but also a diversity across sectors and organisations and levels, different levels of seniority within an organisation, different backgrounds, and all those sort of like protected characteristics and those kind of things. The 8th is partnership working, people working in partnership, because there's lots of different areas of needs for multiple complex needs, and partnership approaches necessary. And then the 9th is a whole system approach, and this is thinking about taking an approach which looks across the whole, it might be the whole person and it might be the whole context, but thinking about the whole system and not trying to look at separate individual parts and splitting that down into particular need areas or particular issues, but really trying to understand things holistically. So I'm just going to talk about the framework that we used. So just I'm not expecting you to read all of this, but just very broadly to say these were the principles that I've just been through, and these principles are they are assumptions where we captured the theory about how golden key thought change would happen, but they're also, and this is quite confusing from an evaluation perspective, but they're not only the sort of assumptions, but they're also the mechanisms of how change is working, and also things that we would be looking for in terms of outcomes as indicating that change is happening. So the second area in the framework is around how we categorize the activities that Golden Key were doing, because there was a lot of different activities happening across Golden Key and within partners that Golden Key had been involved in, responsible for, driving, contributed to, and these were all slightly different. They had different target populations. Some of them were targeting individual organizations, some of them were with Golden Key clients, some were with other service users. And then we were looking at the different change outcomes that we would expect to see from Golden Key systems change activity, which, as I said, also encompasses the principles, the assumptions that underpinned the change activity. But we were specifically then looking at or looking for changes in individual people, so workers within the system or people within the system, changes in their values, behaviours, beliefs, skills and knowledge, changes in the coordination and structural changes within specific organisations, and then moving back to coordination and structural changes between organisations and the way that they work together. And then the sort of the change impact that we were looking for could be within different groups. So it might be very specific individuals or groups of individuals, like Golden Key clients or people who are involved in particular projects. It might be the wider population of multiple complex needs service users. It might stretch to beyond into all service users of a particular service or in a particular area, and then potentially looking at outcomes for Bristol citizens and other people around the country. So that's all I'm going to say about the framework for now. In phase 4, the activity that we designed to support Golden Key in understanding progress with systems change activity was shaped by the framework, and we took a case study approach. So we were looking at drilling down into, we selected 9 specific systems change activities, and we completed interviews, desk-based research into those case studies, and we were looking at looking to understand the activity, how it was developed, the purpose of that activity, and then we were looking at those change outcomes that I went through and looking for the impact outcomes as well. And we were capturing at the same time how those principles were evident in the formation of the activity and in the outcomes. We were looking to identify change, and from those activities we identified some enablers of systems change, and that was really pulling together across the case studies, but also pulling in some of the learning from previous phases and the overall kind of sampling of Golden Key's activity through meetings and kind of a desk review of documentation. So the enablers are what I'm going to go through next. I've got a couple of minutes. I'm just finishing a couple of minutes early, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the case studies, which just to give you a little bit of background about what we covered in the case study. So the first case study was the call-in, and that was a partnership between Golden Key, Avon and Somerset Police and Bristol City Council, and that was looking to divert young people who had been involved in drug-related offending with support, mentoring, learning and activities, and that was mainly focused on young men from ethnic minority groups. And that was an activity that was developed by a particular service coordinator that was looking at transitions, and it was something that emerged from the transitions work. The second case study was around creating safe, inclusive spaces. So this, again, was another activity that emerged from service coordinator work and involved some training and support for other organisations in Bristol, so retail, cafes, other organisations, to make public spaces safer and more inclusive. So, for example, working with staff in cafes and how they could better deal with challenging behaviour from people with multiple complex needs to avoid situations in public spaces escalating. The third case study was around the Creative Solutions Board. This is a multi-agency forum that was looking to find solutions, for particular Golden Key clients who were stuck, and through that work identifying the blocks and the barriers in the system that were causing those activities with senior leaders from multi-agents from different agencies. The fourth case study was around the emergency accommodation team. This was the team that was established in a hotel during the pandemic, providing emergency accommodation and support for housing rough sleepers during everyone's in funding. We also drew on our separate evaluation of Housing First, which is that provides housing and support for people with multiple complex needs to stay in that housing, particularly targeting people who are long-term homeless. The final case study area that we have written up was around reducing recalls in short-term prison sentences where people were recalled to prison for breaking their probation, and a multi-agency systems change group was formed around tackling that particular issue. So that is a whistle-stop tour of our case studies, and I'm now going to I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Richard. We're going to start talking about the enablers. And this was a point where I said to Richard yesterday that I would find an evaluation joke to take us through the scrabbling around of swapping over sharing screens. But the joke was on me, because it turns out there are no evaluation jokes on the internet, on the whole of the internet. So jokes on me working on evaluation, which is not a very jokey area. So I'll hand over to Richard now.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so just to sort of echo the point, the enablers were identified from looking at those cases across them as a whole, and also in addition to the ones that were highlighted in orange at the bottom of the list that Beth had, where we didn't go into so much detail with them, but we drew out general lessons and insights from them to support and complement the more detailed cases we did. So from the phase 4 evaluation, this is all written up in the phase 4 report, which is available on the website, and the link's available at the end of these slides as well. We identified 8 key enablers of systems change that we could see across the various cases, which seemed to be, in a way, back to this point around kind of mechanisms. What are the things that make particular things happen and work? These struck us. You'll see some parallels with the underlying assumptions that that Beth mentioned earlier as well. But we're going to run through these now in turn, really, just sort of summarizing what each of them means and what the implications are. So the first one of these was really around, because this is a partnership of lots of different agencies and partners working all in their own different kind of areas. And what we found was, I guess perhaps unsurprisingly, was where there was a degree of shared agreement and acknowledgement of the issue and the urgency of the issue, that it was a lot easier to begin to make traction and progress on that. So I think the emergency accommodation team, the work during the COVID and everybody in was a really obvious sort of example of this, of where everybody was aware that we had to work very quickly and very collaboratively. And it really gave an opportunity, I guess, to really model and implement some of the learning that had been developed through Golden Key beforehand as well. But this also exists in some of the others, so things like the Creative Solutions Board, the Creating Safe and Inclusive Spaces as well that Beth mentioned, and Housing First and the Recall Group were all examples of where there were multiple partners, not just the lead partner, that recognized the importance of this. And I guess it shows the point really of the importance of kind of building this sense of shared ownership, collective engagement with the issues, and collectively driving forward with them. And how you kind of, I guess, one of the challenges also is how do you recognize and acknowledge the contribution of all partners within interventions like this. The second area really was around the importance of facilitation. So again, working cross-agency, cross-sector, cross-professional areas and levels poses all sorts of challenges around varying levels of understanding, various levels of focus, varying levels of kind of priorities and rewards as well. And of course, it must be recognized that there's also, of course, a degree of competition often between many providers as well for finite resources and as well. So one of the things that Golden Key I think realized relatively early on and began to build into many of the areas of work was around skilled and independent facilitation. So certainly we first saw this with the partnership board. So this partnership board of the various partners of Golden Key, and bringing in an external facilitator who was not a member of any one of those organizations, but who was able to kind of bridge the gap. And I guess the important thing is also what was being done behind the scenes. So the work on this picture, you can see John Simpson, who's the chair of the partnership board for Golden Key. One of the things he did also was a lot of the one-to-one conversations in between meetings. So it's not just what goes on in the meetings, it goes on with what goes on in between as well. So there's opportunities for collectively working together and then just sort of checking in and also keeping everybody on board. And it has been remarkable, I guess, about the level of high level commitment through people from very busy roles, across many areas, who've stuck with and stayed with Golden Key throughout the whole period it's been running. We've also seen this this has been mirrored in a number of the other areas too, like the Creative Solutions Board as well, and into Changing Futures, which is the new piece of work developing out of this. We're also using a similar approach, and it seems to be quite effective. Rather than some groups had people nominated from within, and I think again importance that facilitation, but it was maybe more variable how effective that was. Third area really was around the importance of kind of role modeling the principles. So these were in a way the things that Beth outlined. There was a lot of kind of both explicit and implicit knowledge in terms of working with trauma-informed ways of working, person-centered approaches, the work particularly of the service coordinators, but also people in various different levels and roles. And what we found was many of these areas and the initiatives we looked at gave the opportunity for people to sort of model and mirror and see how these things were acted holistically. So again, the Creative Solutions Board, very good example of where service coordinators would work alongside partners from a range of other agencies, but modeling and embedding these ways of working. Again, the emergency accommodation team and most of the other cases we looked at, we could see this. But of course, I guess it shows the importance of looking at these things as a whole, rather than just focusing in on just 2 or 3 areas. So what was being modeled really was the whole 8 of these principles, rather than just 1 or 2 on their own. It involved things like building in reflective practice, in particular trauma-informed approaches of working and engaging with lived experience. And then another sort of 4th area really was around the importance of following the energy and adapting to changing context. So we've talked a bit about sort of the emergent process of this, needing to adapt and respond to shifting and changing circumstances. And again, of course, a big project like Golden Key begins with a sort of a plan of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. But of course, there is a need to build in an ability for sort of agility and adaptability as we move forward as circumstances change. So again, COVID is a very obvious example that changed significantly the landscape, but because of flexibility around budgets, around staffing, around sort of the expertise and how it was being deployed, and support from the commissioners and the funders around enabling that flexibility and redirection of resourcing, enabled to kind of be more sort of flight of foot. So the idea that systems change, it's not kind of you work it all the way through, but it's actually following the energy and moving on to the other ones. It also involved building those relationships and partnerships and allies with other significant systems leaders and influencers across the city. So on this picture, we've got the Deputy Mayor Asher Craig, who's been involved and worked alongside Golden Key, alongside her much wider portfolio of work around, across the city as well. So it's how do you connect and follow and work with these initiatives as we go forward. And certainly the transition into changing futures is again a kind of great example of that, of systems change, building on stepping stones from one thing to another. So I'll pass over to Beth now to go through the next 4 of these.
Thanks, Richard. So passionate and committed individuals who are empowered to take action was, and this somewhat links to the principle from the framework around staff support and empowerment, but we particularly saw across the case studies that the areas where we could see change happening, where change seemed to be moving forward and there was a positive progress, there were key individuals that were really critical to developing that intervention, that were really passionate about the issue. They brought with them knowledge and real sense of passion for driving that issue forward. And we found that was both service coordinators within Golden Key who were doing more frontline work, but also from senior leadership as well, that it wasn't necessarily a thing that was related to seniority of people driving things forward. It's a passionate individual at any level wanting to affect change. And examples of this would include the recall groups, where we saw senior leadership really committed to taking action on reducing recalls. And they then also draw in more operational staff to take part in the group who were particularly passionate about that issue. And we saw in the service, the projects that were particularly led, initiated and developed and led by service coordinators, we also saw, they really brought their passion and their knowledge of the issues that they developed through working with people, with Golden Key clients, people with multiple complex needs. And it was their knowledge, the passion, but also supported by their knowledge of the issues and the relationships that they had with other people in services that was able to drive that forwards. So I think the learning there is really around how can you feed people's passions, because the passion that people have for making change is a really valuable kind of intangible resource in systems change. And what can you do to empower people to take action about those things that they're talking about and that they're passionate about. Richard, I'm ready for my next slide. Thanks. So the second I'm going to talk about is about embracing client voice through stories of lived experience. So when we were looking, this covers 2 areas in the principles that we were looking for, and this was around including lived experience and also including diversity of perspectives and experience. And what we found emerged from the case studies was that people from the IF group and people with lived experience who were part of Golden Key's, these particular case study projects that we looked at and part of Golden Key, were sharing their own stories and stories of people they knew or had witnessed, and examples in particular meetings and groups. And other staff who were attending these groups found this really powerful. And it wasn't just people with lived experience that were sharing stories. It was also frontline staff. So where there were service coordinators involved or other frontline staff, that they were also able to share their experience and those stories. And we found, like in the Creative Solutions board, there were quite detailed case reviews, but it's not just having some very detailed case study or case example. It was also just snippets of narrative that just allowed people to understand the kind of context behind something and why something was happening, and it really humanized issues for people. And I think that really that power of story in bringing lived experience. And I think the learning there for us was that actually, yes, we think lived experience is really important to bring to the table, but if there are situations where it's not possible to do that, to keep that going through thinking about how can you bring stories, how can you encourage frontline staff to share examples, because that context of someone's whole life and a real example is really important. Okay, I'm going to move on, Richard, please. So the seventh enabler that we have is around staff with dedicated time to develop and run systems change activities. Now, this is one which is a fairly, it seems fairly simplistic, but change projects are much like any other projects, is that they actually, doesn't matter how passionate you are, they don't run on magic. They actually require people's time and resources. And what we found through looking at the case studies and also thinking about the areas which didn't move forwards, and perhaps ideas and activities which didn't then result in further action or change, it was where resources were allocated to those projects. So, for example, on the recall group, Golden Key contributed facilitation and some administrative support to running that group. And without that, other groups that formed, it was much harder for people where they didn't have dedicated time to do those things, to drive that forward. And I think the learning there really is just to recognize that systems change projects are change projects, and they are projects and they require real work. And you may have passionate individuals who will try and squeeze it in, and they will really want to move it forward, but without dedicated time, that's likely to be very slow and can be quite stressful and lead to people burning out. So yeah, allocate resources. And the final enabler that we wanted to share was an active focus on learning and development. So we really, and we saw this particularly in the projects that the service coordinators were leading, we could trace back through the service coordinator activity to particularly through the action experiments. So where very kind of small change activities and observations going through this action experiment cycle of kind of experimentation and reflective practice really supported things. Not everything, lots of things did not turn into change projects, but some things got legs and moved forward, and that was through a kind of a very kind of recursive cycle of trying things and developing, and trying things and developing. And the calling would be an excellent example of that, where there's a service coordinator working on looking at transitions, young people's transitions, and thinking about how to where things were going wrong and how to affect change, and developing relationships with different stakeholders in Bristol, and that led to something which is now kind of funded separate project. And we really saw that that underpinning that was, and anyone who's talked about learning will be very familiar with the idea that, failure is an opportunity to learn. But we really saw that in action, that, something not working wasn't a kind of, well, let's kick that under the carpet and, try and forget about that. It was a real opportunity to think about why that didn't work and what could you do differently, and to move forwards from there. And we think, particularly around the learning development angle, Golden Key's training on systems change was something that people came back to. The action experiments gave people a tool to use, something tangible to apply to their work. And it gave people understanding and shared language of systems change, and a way of kind of taking that learning and development and moving forwards into action. So that is all of the enablers that we were going to run through that came out of sort of the long phases of the evaluation. I'm going to hand back to Richard now to talk about what else we've done with these.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, these are all written up in the reports, and actually Beth shared the links to those in the chat. So there are also the links at the end of the slides that you'll be sent out afterwards. We're aware, though, of course, like all of these sort of projects, there's quite a lot of detail in there. And so one of our things that we've kind of been looking at sort of more recently is how we might make that more accessible to people working particularly in frontline roles, or sort of planning out projects and interventions, to help them think about how can we kind of capture the main elements of that learning to inform the kinds of work that we're doing. So this is something that we're just in the process of finalizing, the practical systems change tool. This has been part of our phase 5 work. And we are looking for volunteers to help us kind of trial and test to see if this makes sense and would be useful and applicable to you in your role. So if you'd like to and have time to kind of have a look through this, it's quite a brief document. We'd really welcome your insights on that. So we'll ask you to maybe drop in the chat whether or not this is something you'd be able to take a look at, we've got quite a rapid turnaround on it actually. So, but maybe once I've explained it, we can invite you again to contribute. So you'll see again echoes of many of the things that we've talked about before, but I guess what's important here is to say that this piece of work has been informed by not just the sort of phase 3 and the phase 4 evaluation, but also Golden Key, the learning team, the partnership board and others have been doing quite a lot of their own work and trying to capture their insights and principles around working with systems change. And they've all fed into and informed us drawing out what we have here as these key areas. So sort of 7 sort of primary areas that we've got in the practical systems tool. And for each of these, we provide, you've got an illustration of one of the pages here, we provide a brief description of what the principle means, because again, as we know, people coming from different professional and occupational backgrounds may have different understandings of what principles might mean. We give an indication of what that's meant and how it's been interpreted within Golden Key. And then a set of questions that people can drive reflection around the kind of things about how we might build this in, what it might mean in practice. And then some suggestions, again, informed by the work that we've done and that Golden Key's done over the last few years, really to inform the kind of actions, the kind of interventions that might enable us to put this front and center in the kind of work that we'll be doing. So quickly run through these again. So person-centered services really at the heart of it. That's been at the heart of Golden Key throughout, and it's really how do you build and provide services that meet the needs of clients where they are, when they're there, and recognizing there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Then the responses to that, I guess, are about the importance of working collaboratively and in partnership. And again, a lot of lessons around how to work effectively, collaboratively and in partnership, and how to kind of overcome some of the challenges that might emerge. The importance around working with a diversity of perspectives and experiences. This has been touched on particularly by what Beth's talked about. So bringing in voices of lived experience, bringing in people from a whole host of different levels and different agencies and across the different parts of the sector, and also, of course, diversity of demographic and personal background. So again, the more different perspectives, the more likely you are to get sort of a fuller, more rounded picture and be able to respond to, you know, the needs and lives and understand the needs and lives of people that are diverse and varied in their backgrounds as well. Relationships. So this was a key element. It was also identified as one of the 3 key pillars that I know was talked about in an earlier webinar. So really this is fundamentally about relationships. So between the service coordinator and clients, and also between people across different agencies, that building the relationships. And that's going beyond just a simple professional relationship, but actually a relationship that kind of really means something, is fundamental to moving this forward. Looking at it from a whole system approach, of course, the system is many things, so it's not just one part. You know, what we've got is multiple interconnecting systems here, and a key element there is often about how do you connect more of the system to itself. So, you know, we've got housing pathways, we've got criminal justice pathways, we've got health pathways. How do we work with this? And one of the things that Golden Key's played an important role in is some of those bridging and kind of connecting roles of linking different parts of that together. People support and empowerment. This is really around particularly for staff, but people at all levels. So how do we build in that culture of learning, of development, of support, but also giving people for the time out as well, that this is very demanding personal work as well. So to giving people the time and space as well, rather than constantly kind of putting forward. And again, some of the collaborative team working and the understanding of relationships is really key. And again, this point around learning and reflection, around trialing different approaches and learning from them. And so, of course, you know, our evaluation work informs part of the learning and capturing the learning from Golden Key. There are a host of other resources, some of which have been shared in early webinars, most of which are on the website as well. And we really do hope that you and colleagues will pick up on these going forward, because, you know, there is a lot of learning that can be taken to inform this kind of work going forward. So
our final slide, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. So just to say, all of the reports are up on the Golden Key website. We're just in the process of finalising the sign-off for the phase 5 reports, which again have been particularly looking at kind of the impact on clients and client outcomes, but a range of other things in there as well, and trying to capture some of the service coordinator learning around trauma-informed and person-centered support. So that will be coming out by the end of the month as well. And then there's a whole host of other materials from the Fulfilling Lives evaluation more broadly. So, Bristol was one of 12 projects doing this. There are findings from the national evaluators and also from the other projects all available here. So we really do encourage and invite you to have a look at that. And I know there's a learning event from Fulfilling Lives next week as well that you might want to sign up and go to. These are contact details for myself and Beth. Please do get in touch if you want to pick up on any of these things. Again, we are aware there's quite a lot of material there. So if you're really thinking about how do I embed and implement some of this in practice, please do reach out and contact us, and we'll do our best to support and help you find out ways to work with that. And if you have the time or inclination to help us look at our system practical tool and find out if it really is that practical, or if there are ways we can make it more practical or helpful, please do let us know. We can send that out straight away. And ideally, we'd get some feedback by next Thursday in order for us to sort of finalise that before Golden Key sort of officially comes to an end at the end of next month.
Richard,
so that's
sorry, I was just going to say, I just wanted to say that I know we've kind of went through the principles and then we went through the enablers, and there's obviously some crossover between these. That the practical system change tool basically is a kind of morphing of those two things into, like, the principles would be a sort of our theory about how systems change works. The enablers is what we found in practice in Golden Key's case study areas in Golden Key's practice, and then we've merged all those together. So this sort of the culmination of our learning is captured in this practical tool. So if you want to take away something, then we just encourage you to engage with the practical tool if you've got time, or whenever it is that you're thinking about starting some systems change activity.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. So I've stopped sharing the slides. That's the end of our slides. It's the end of sort of the presentation part from ourselves. So I'm aware some stuff's probably coming on the Q&A, but this is where we have some time for Q&A discussion. I see Joe that Joe Welford has shared in the chat the link to the Fulfilling Lives event next week. So thanks for that, Joe.
Thank you both very much. There's an awful lot to take in. One thing that we wanted to know was, it was a massive project to undertake. What were the most difficult, most challenging parts of following Golden Key through all this time and putting the evaluations together?
That's such a big question. I mean, should we answer this separately, Richard, or if we had different challenges? I mean, from my perspective, it was the sheer volume of Golden Key activity and the fact that how to focus our evaluation resources on areas which were helpful for Golden Key's learning, being quick enough to be able to turn things around quickly to support Golden Key's learning when everything was changing really quickly. Yeah, I think particularly the doing good evaluation with the sheer volume of activity and the amount of resources that we had in when everything is very complex and changing, which I'm sure is a challenge that anyone else working with systems change has as well. Richard, do you have particular challenges?
I mean, I think I'd sort of echo the same point, and of course that's in a way why we went for the phased approach, and the phases weren't really planned out that way in advance. They kind of adapted as we went forward, really, too. So we had to be kind of adaptable in our, but we couldn't really look at everything at the same time. So it's why some phases focus more on systems change and some focus more on client experience and outcomes. So I think it was just with a finite size of team, and just with the volume of activity that was going on, it was really kind of focusing in, but using those to try to sort of illustrate and capture what that might mean more broadly.
My own personal, Yeah, because my own personal thing when I first joined and looked at the evaluations that you were doing is, how did you actually go about doing them? How did you have regular meetings for updates and that sort of thing?
So I mean, again, I guess the complexity is also because of the range of sort of expertise that we have. So we had a team of which Beth, myself, and Chris Pawson were probably kind of the core team, and then we worked with a number of other colleagues in other areas throughout, but we drew on different areas of expertise. So there's of course got a lot of expertise around psychological interventions and working with clients, and there's other ones around systems change. So we liaised closely as a team throughout, but we kind of divided pieces of work between us. We also participated in general in the Golden Key Forum. So I attended the partnership boards throughout. Beth and Chris attended the meetings of the Systems Change group and the Independent Futures group at varying stages at points through as well. And we also checked in regularly with the Golden Key program team, and we also had an evaluation advisory group that met quarterly. So it was a group of people from Golden Key, and also again that had an independent facilitator, and so basically there were kind of points where we kind of checked in. We agreed at the beginning of each of the phases what the program, our activity was going to be for that phase, and we got agreement with it, and then we kind of went ahead and pulled the things back together again. So I guess another challenge within that, though, of course, was finding the time for people to really digest and make use of what had come out of the previous phase. So I think that was perhaps an issue, that of course there's a lot of complexity and detail that comes out of this, but we're aware because it's a moving thing, people are really very, very busy. Often by the time we'd been able to kind of write up and sort of disseminate and sign off the evaluation findings from one phase, we're kind of into the next phase of activity. So I think dissemination has remained a challenge. Again, and that's one of the reasons why I think we pulled together the systems change tool to try to make that as a if people can't read can't or don't have time to read all of the full detailed documents, they can focus in on and draw insights from that.
We've got two other questions.
Yeah.
The first is there evidence that system change has occurred? And the second is from Joe at the National Evaluation, which is what has been the biggest learning about researching and evaluating a programme that works with such a complex group of beneficiaries? Should we fight over these, Richard? Or
I don't mind. You take your pick, Beth, and I'll pick up the other one.
I mean, in terms of the evidence that systems change has occurred, from the case studies that we looked at, we did find evidence that change had occurred in the areas, in some of the areas that we looked at, and that's obviously was different in the different case study areas. The strongest evidence was around the individual staff changes, particularly those people who were closest to the interventions, but also some good evidence of changes, smaller changes within organisation, and some limited evidence of changes between organisations. In terms of the biggest learning about researching and evaluating a programme that works with such a complex, I mean, I think we changed things from the beginning. So in the first phase, we had we produced a long report, and I think subsequent stages in the middle, we tried to produce kind of shorter, less formal papers, which we called discussion papers, but just enabled, it just felt a little bit less like it was a very formal evaluation, kind of judgment of the programme. And it was something that I think helped people just to engage with what the learning was. And actually they were published in exactly the same way the reports were in the end, but I think there was a sort of feeling that it was a slightly less formal approach. I mean, the biggest learning about the programme overall, I think the principles and the framework around the systems change were really important for us in where to start, how to go about evaluating systems change, which is starting in small pockets and projects, but potentially is spreading out across the whole system. So having something which helped us shape our approach there was really important. In terms of the direct research we did with Golden Key clients, I mean, I think taking a collaborative approach to the peer research was really helpful. I remember, you know, I think a participative approach to research with multiple complex needs is really, really important, because, you know, we really needed their input to you know, we were making assumptions about how we would shape the research, and they were so important. You know, the IF group members that helped us were so important in saying, no, you know, yeah, that's ridiculous, don't ask that. You can't phrase that, like, won't understand what that means. You know, no, you don't go there and expect that. Well, they won't tell you about that. So yeah, there's some really practical things that they were just, you know, amazing at supporting us with. So I think the participatory element would be really important. Richard.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things on there, I guess. So of course, yeah, the participatory kind of peer research element, I think, is really important, Joe, but also, yeah, a challenge around that, of course, in terms of the practicalities of making that happen. So in reality, I think, you know, often because things would change. So in the latest round, we had plans to do kind of peer co interviews, but because of another sort of surge in COVID infections, that became not possible to do it in quite that way. So I guess it's about this adaptability, you know, being able to kind of adapt and flex accordingly, which was an issue, but certainly the ability of people to build rapport and connect with those with the client population. I think a couple of other things is one around the challenge of getting kind of reliable, robust data and evidence. So throughout this, and across the Fulfilling Lives generally, they've been capturing the service coordinators have been capturing outcome star data and the NDT data as well. In a way, they're self-report indicators from the client and the service coordinator. We, of course, all of the other agencies, health and police and others, kind of capture their own sets of data as well. But we did struggle, I guess, in reality, of trying to get to the actual original core data, largely due to data sharing agreements and so on. I think, you know, ideally that would be something that would be really important to try to get in place, the ability to do that, but also to be aware that, you know, sometimes that data, particularly self-report data with these sorts of clients, is sometimes not as robust or reliable as one might hope it would be. And I guess that, you know, that then links to the point, the ability to kind of really demonstrate the impact. Of course, everybody would love to have a kind of good sort of numeric quantitative indicator of what the impact is, what's the, you know, what's the return on investment kind of answer. But I think that often, you know, it gives a real chance that you might just miss what's important there. So of course, you know, the measures are, you know, you measure what you can, but not necessarily always what most counts to those clients. And I guess the other thing with these sorts of clients and the complex lives that they're living is, yeah, you know, again, what they would see as progress or a successful outcome is maybe different from some of what the commissioners or the agencies might originally sort of anticipate or hope. And to be sensitive to that, and also the ability of how difficult it can be to kind of give a hard, fast measure or indicator of what that impact is. So yeah, hopefully that kind of adds the other bits to there.
I mean, no one's asked this question, but the question I think, like the toughest nut to crack was particularly around accessing clients who were less engaged or disengaged from Golden Key. And I still feel like there's you know, a really big missing piece around the people who wouldn't speak to us, we couldn't contact, we couldn't get in touch with. And I think that, you know, that is still a challenge.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Questions.
But that's perfect timing, because we've just run out of time. If anybody has any more questions that come up afterwards, they can send them to me or directly to you both, I guess. So thank you both very, very much for that. And I've just got time to say that we have the final webinar in this series of webinars, which takes place Friday week, the 17th of June at 11 AM, which is creating change perspectives from the ED&I leadership journey. So the panelists will be looking at the three main themes that emerged when addressing the complexities of ED&I and sharing the success factors that they identified for positive ED&I outcomes based on their own journeys. So I hope you'll join us for that. But if you can't, or you've missed any of the previous webinars in the series, they're all being recorded. As soon as this one is ready and up, I will email everybody with the link, but they're all on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to share them with your colleagues. And if you go to our website, goldenkeybristol.org.uk, all our learning products are available to be downloaded. So on that note, thank you to Beth and to Richard and to everybody who attended, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.